So welcome, Olgeta, and thanks everyone for your participation today in what is the second workshop for exploring our world using Google Earth for storytelling, one of the collaborative projects we're offering as part of phase 2 of PASS. It's great to have you here today. Before going any further, I'd like to start by acknowledging all the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work, live and learn, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I particularly acknowledge the Bunurong people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and meet with you today. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And as is the tradition for PASS, I'd like to now hand over to Medi Rita, who is going to deliver the opening prayer for this workshop. Over to you, Medi.
We just thank you that we can come together this afternoon as students, educators and facilitators. Father, we ask that you will take us through this session. We pray especially for our students, our teachers and the facilitators who will be leading us through this afternoon. We ask for your guidance, your lordship in whatever transpires this afternoon, for the sharing and the learning and the teaching that will take place. Father, we pray that the Holy Spirit will guide us through and be with us throughout the session. This is our prayer we ask in no other name but in the name of Jesus, who is our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Thank you, Medi, for that opening prayer. So, as I said, we're focusing on exploring our world using Google Earth for storytelling with Dr. John Bailey. I'm going to hand over now to John to facilitate this workshop. Thanks, John.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening in my case, but I think it's still just about afternoon for the rest of you. Thanks for joining us again. Hopefully all of you were here for the last session, but if you weren't, no worries. It's not that you didn't miss anything, it's just it's very easy to catch up. That's why we've broken this course into different sessions. There's different activities that are on the webpage, so you can use those to do the things that we covered last time. Basically, we were giving an introduction to Google Earth and getting everyone comfortable with the basics, with navigating around and really setting the stage for what we want to do this week, or start to do this week. Because as great as Google Earth is as a tool to explore places and see the imagery and things related to that, or maybe to find our way around different environments, where its real strengths lies is in its ability to take these different locations and craft what I'm going to call genuinely content, but specifically really refers to maps or tours or very much stories about these locations. So that's where we want to get our head up from the beginning here, is we're thinking in terms of stories told on a geo-located campus. So stories or maps that have stops along the way that are associated with locations. All right. So to get going here, you don't really need to see me. So I'm going to switch to showing some slides. So if I'm just going to present for a second. And hopefully, okay. All right. All right. Are we able to see this? Someone let me know if you can't. All right. Okay. I'm going to assume this is all good. All right. So what are we doing specifically today? Well, we're really going to talk about three aspects. We're going to talk about the types of content that you find in Google Earth and kind of the history behind that, how we get to the features that we find there currently. We're going to talk about our ideas for content. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean things that you would like to see, to build, to visualize in Google Earth. That might sound like a high ideal, but hopefully what you'll realize by the end of this session is that's actually quite easy to do. And that's the third part of our session today, is to bring those ideas together that you have and to show you the tools that are in Google Earth or get you started in using the tools to create those things. So let's back up to number one and just very briefly talk about the sort of historical aspect, if you will, here. So if you remember from last week, we showed this slide. This was something called Keyhole Earth Viewer. This was the original Google Earth before it was Google Earth, before Google bought this startup company called Keyhole. And we showed how this looked kind of similar to the Google Earth versions that were then released. But we didn't really look too closely at it. So right now, I just want to point out two key areas. Down in the bottom left here where it says Map Legend, there's these boxes. Some are checked, some are unchecked. Earth, roads, weather, borders. This appears to be features or layers, if you will, that can turn on or off, like the borders. We can see the white lines showing country borders. That makes sense. And then the other thing we have over here is we have this big panel that's labeled at the top with My Places. Now that also is maybe kind of telling as to what it might do. If it's My Places, well, maybe this is where we can put my content, the content I've gathered or even created myself. Because this ability to have different forms of content goes all the way back to this sort of pre-Google Earth Google Earth. In fact, this My Places is an area where you can put your own content that you created. And we're not going to get into this, but the computer code behind that is something called KML, which in fact stands for Keyhole Markup Language. It keeps some of that legacy name Keyhole in there. But as Google Earth evolved, so did the sort of the content. However, we still had this distribution. If you look here, we've got Places and My Places. And down here, we've now got a lot more layers. It's called layers. But we've also got this thing called Earth Gallery. And there's some interesting layers in here called like global awareness. So this was sort of a third category developed, whereby, so we had the layers, what we call vector layers, so things like roads, place names, stuff like that, that is just part of the map, if you will. We have the content that a person might develop for themselves up in Places. Let's not worry about that for now. Let's instead focus on this Earth Gallery global awareness. This is content that partners made with Google. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean things like the slide I showed last week with the volcanoes layer, whereby Google and the Smithsonian got together and made a whole bunch of markers that showed locations of volcanoes around the world. And going forward with Google Earth, this has all been refined in the quote, new Google Earth. So you saw this slide last week, and we talked about many of the features and functions over on the side here. Today, we're going to talk about the ones that we didn't quite get into, or we only got into very briefly. So the third button down here, this little ship's wheel, this is the Voyager layer. This is the partner created content in Google Earth. Now, we talked about the 1 second from bottom, the maps style. Now, that's where you're going to find things like roads and borders these days. We showed that last week. But the other thing we have in here above that is projects. And so projects is where you can create your own features. So today we're going to be focusing on map projects. But before that, we're going to be focusing on Voyager. So the best way to show this is for me to leave the presentation and just go live. So I'm in Google Earth now, and I'm going to click on that Voyager layer, and this is going to pop up. Now, it may be a little slow for you if your internet isn't the greatest, because this is a very visual layer. You see things are rotating around, showing different content that's in there. But let's just scroll down a little bit here, and let's look at where there's some words. So what these words are giving us are different categories of content that is available in Google Earth. So for example, if we were to go to the nature layer, which is the one we're clicked on right now, we have things, and when I say content, there's a couple of different things here. We're going to see some examples. I just want to find one. Okay, let's start with safeguarding iconic parks. So when you open one of these Voyager features, you tend to get this start card. It can come in different forms, but this is a typical one here. So what we need to do is we need to click the blue Explore button. And what happens is a whole bunch of icons pop up on the screen. And these are showing us places around the world. In fact, let's just make it a little clearer here. Here we go. And I can click on these markers to go and open up what we call a side panel here. And this side panel can have a number of things going on. Think of this almost like a mini web page, because we've got text in here, and some of this text is hyperlinked to more information. We have pictures up here. Maybe sometimes we have more than one picture. You also are going to find videos that you can click on in there. There's a button here that's important, because what this button does is it flies us down to this particular location that we're talking about, so we can look in more detail at that area. Now, in this particular case, it's actually taken us into a street view shot. So the 360 imagery, and we're going to look at this again later in the session, where we can look around in every direction. And we can back out of that, and we can go back. Now, if it seems like we've got a little lost and we just want to sort of reset things, we can go up to the top right here and click Restart. Or we could have just zoomed all the way out and explored around for different markers. So that's one example of this type of Voyager content. That's one that we categorize as nature. We also have other categories in here. And one way to access it is just to click on a category, say like culture, and scroll down and try and find things. But that maybe isn't overly satisfying. It might be hard, because one little thing I will tell you is they move that stuff around every day to keep it fresh. So for those people that just like to scroll down and explore, if you go back tomorrow, it's all going to be in a different location. So that can be really annoying, because you might find something that's really good, and then you're like, oh, I can't find it again. But there is an easy way to do that. We can actually use our search panel over here, and we can search. Let's just do a search for a country. We're not thinking of a particular story, but let's search for Papua New Guinea. And, oh, sorry, that's going to fly us if we just click on it like that. Getting ahead of myself. That obviously took us to Papua New Guinea, as we learned last week. But we have an option to see some other search results up here. For example, guided tours. And it's giving this option, beautiful birds of paradise. So if we open that one, now you'll notice on the panel that opened with this, there's one of these videos that I promised you. So if I was to click on that, the video would open and play. I'm not going to do that, because videos in Google Meet are not usually a very good experience. But you can explore from here. We can go down to the bottom of this panel and click on these little chevrons, and this will fly us to these places. So what we have going on here is a collection of locations in Papua New Guinea where we have wonderful examples of the bird of paradise species. And so this was some content made by the BBC, and it's got videos and photos and text, so you can explore around. Now, the important thing I'll point out here, or what I'll point out about the content we've seen so far, is it doesn't really matter the order in which we're viewing this. You know, it's you know, we could have gone to one point or another point. It makes no difference. We can jump around. They're all kind of equal. There's no set ordering of these. So this is what I personally would call a collection or a map. Now, this is in contrast to something like the next thing I'm going to show you, which I'm going to find because I happen to know the name of it. It's a history of cricket. So this is a global story, but obviously, you know, very strong area of interest in Australia. Now, when we start exploring this one, you see it's a similar kind of layout, points on the map. But what's intriguing about this one is there is actually a kind of order to it. So the order in this case is a chronological one. So here we're talking about 1787 and some of the deep history behind cricket related to venues in London. If we move to the next one, we're moving forward in time because the British took it to like the West Indies, through the Empire. And then as you go through these things, you'll see that it's telling you things about cricket, but it's sort of doing it on a chronological timeline. Now, another way of ordering content might be as a geographic tour. What do I mean by that? Well, think of it, if you were building one of these to show people around your school, you could just make it a whole bunch of points on the map, or you could maybe take them on a tour in the way that you would if they were there in person and you wanted to show them your school campus. You know, think about the first place you would begin. That would be your first marker. Like, where's the second stop you're going to go to? And like that. And you can, quote, force them, although they can just click on the markers, but using the panels, you can guide them to go and follow this content in a specific order. Does that make sense to people so far? I'm going to pause very quickly and see if there's any questions before we dive in any further. Please feel free to sort of speak up, raise your hand, or if you have questions as we're going along, certainly put them in the chat. Okay, all quiet. I'm going to assume we're good. So let's move on to another example. And, oh, no, that's not it. You know what? I don't think I have it open. Maybe I do. Oh, there we go. Okay, I had this one pre-opened. Apparently I had the cricket one pre-opened as well, and I forgot. All right, so this is one that I really like to highlight. This is sort of one of my favorite pieces of content in there. And this is where we're now crossing from making a map or collection or a tour to truly using the features in here to tell a story. I think many of you in Australia might be familiar with this story. Maybe our friends in PNG, not so much. So those of you that aren't, this is a story about a guy called Saru Briley. Saru was born in India, but when he was 5 years old, through a sequence of events, he accidentally got stuck on a train and he ended up thousands of kilometers away from home. He became an orphan on the streets of Kolkata. He was eventually taken into an orphanage, and then he was actually adopted by parents from Tasmania. So he grew up in Tasmania. But as he got older, Saru, he had memories and flashbacks to his life as a little kid in India. But obviously, he didn't know where he came from. But he had a few kind of things he remembered. And so someone introduced him to Google Earth. And he began this incredible journey where he used Google Earth as a way of figuring out where he came from. So what we're seeing here in this Voyager story is a sort of step-by-step visualization. Here he is where he moves to Tasmania, of his story. So there he moved to Tasmania, and now he's realizing he can use Google Earth because he knew he traveled on a train and he knew roughly how many hours he was on the train and stuff. So he started manually searching all the train lines in India. And if you have no idea how many train lines in India, I'm just going to tell you, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of train lines in India. But he worked through some other evidence, and it's a really incredible story. There's a book about it. They made a movie called Lion. I'm going to sort of spoil it for you a little bit. He manages to figure out his way home, and he actually takes a journey there. And I won't spoil the whole kind of ending for you, but definitely read the book or see the movie Lion. But what I want you to take from this is the fact that what we're showing here is a step-by-step story. Now, we have some sort of fancy visualizations going on here, like the circle and the coloring and this little dot timeline here. This is not something you're going to be able to do in your creation in Google Earth. But the idea that you can put a series of stops together that fit as a timeline, that is very much something we hope you're going to be able to do. All right, now I just want to wrap up a couple of other points real quickly in Google Earth here, in the Voyager layer. Specifically, I want to point out that there are some other sort of categories we haven't talked about, like collections of street view. And also, more importantly, there are going to be aspects in here that seem really cool, but they're not things that you can do. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean things like, for example, on the tsunami layer we have here. If we open one of these examples, no, not the one I wanted. Let's stop that. Oh, well, a minute, that will do. Okay. So if you see here, we've got this really colorful overlay, as we call it, that's appeared, which is showing us the directional power of a tsunami. That wasn't the one I wanted to show. I'm just going to restart this so I can click on the correct one, because I wanted to click on one that we're maybe actually familiar with because it was in our lifetime. Here we go. Much more powerful. This was the 2011 tsunami that happened off the coast of Japan. Now, those of you that live on the north coast of PNG, you may have felt and seen some effects for this, but you can see that actually in many ways you got off pretty well from this tsunami, because what we're seeing here is the whites and the reds show where the power from this tsunami was focused. People don't realize this, but tsunamis are directional. So most of it traveled towards the east, traveled towards Hawaii, which is where I am right now. So in fact, the waves from this event in Hawaii were probably bigger than anything that hit the coast of PNG. Meanwhile, Australia got off pretty lightly because PNG is blocking everything for Australia. So once again, PNG is looking after Australia. So these are the sort of things you might find in some of this content, some visualizations, advanced visualizations like this. There's even some interactive games available. But what we're going to focus on are the basics, the idea that you can make these place marks, that you can attach these side information cards that connect to them. And most importantly, that we do it in a way where there's some thought process, there's some narrative, as we like to call it, connecting these points together. So with that in mind, we're actually going to take a pause in our session and use some time here to think and discuss. So there are two important things I want you to start thinking about at this point. Number one, what type of, let's call it a visualization or content, do you think you want to create? And what do I mean by that? Well, do you think you actually want to make a collection of points? Do you think you want to make more of a tour? Or do you think you might be able to make a story? So that's number one. Number two, what is the topic that you're going to associate with that story or tour? No, so you don't have to have the answer right now, but I'm hoping maybe you're starting to get ideas. And I really encourage you to maybe focus your topic on something that is, first of all, familiar to you, and second of all, would be interesting to share with your partner schools. So, you know, I'm thinking about things like in PNG, some of you live near volcanoes, but in Australia, they don't really know too much about volcanoes, at least not in terms of day-to-day living by one, because there are some old dead volcanoes and craters in Australia, but nothing exciting. You have to go to New Zealand or to Papua New Guinea to find the good stuff. Now, some of you may even have seen live eruptions. So sharing things like that could be interesting. Or if you're in Australia, sharing your unique environments and maybe what your neighborhood or your town is like with PNG, because trust me, you all live in very different types of places. Because I've been fortunate enough to visit many of them, and I know that there are some big differences. All right, so maybe Sophie, Nicole, you can help facilitate this if I've sort of missed anything in my overview there. But I think what we're going to do initially is we're going to pause for maybe 5+ minutes to just think about this, then turn to your neighbors that you're in a room with and talk over those ideas. If you're by yourself, just think through this, or maybe go into Voyager and start playing around and getting inspiration, or try and do all of those things. So I will mute myself right now, but please speak up or put something in the chat if you have questions.
And John, Nicholas has just added that question. Do you want physical or built environments?
You know, that is totally up to you, Nicholas. The one thing I will say is you want to be able to get, and we're coming to this after this bit, you need to be able to get information on this, and you need to associate that information with geolocations. So, you know, you will want to be able to like source photographs and source text and maybe links to other things, maybe videos. And you want to be able to associate those photos and that text with a specific location. It's a little bit different, say, if we were like just writing a book or a novella where we could put pictures and text in, but we don't have to geographically locate it. All right, we're going to go into Google Earth in a minute, and I've got it open here, but we're gonna open projects and show you how to get started. But before I even do that, I'm actually going to go to this tab here and to just what is simply a Google Doc. Now, you can even view this particular Google Doc right here. I've made a bit.ly link for you to get there. Now, this is the example I'm going to use to show you how to build content in Google Earth. It's the story of the Kokoda track campaign. I'm thinking and hoping I probably don't need to explain what the Kokoda track is to any of you. But if you don't know, that the first part of my document gives you a little overview. But the important thing about what I'm showing here is before you even get into Google Earth, the key to all of this creation that we're going to show you is preparation. I mean, that's the key to life, right? But the key to this particular part of life is preparing your information and your story that you want to tell. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is gathering together things like, okay, where can I find images that I might want to show? What's the text that I want to put in there? I don't want to be writing the text in Google Earth. I want to write it in a document where I can happily spell check it, and then I can copy paste it into Google Earth. So, and I want to gather my facts and figures all here. So when I go to Google Earth, I'm just worrying about creating the best visual experience that I can. I'm not worrying about, oh, I didn't find a photo for this, I didn't find information on that. So I've created this document because in the walkthrough that is chapter 4 in the student workbook that walks you through step by step how to create projects, it uses this information. So in fact, I've made a project around this. So let's start by going and seeing this. We're talking about these projects that we can create. Let's see what that actually looks like. So in this particular case, this is my project. Now what you're seeing it in is the edit mode. Now, if we were showing this in a presentation like right now, much better that I hit this button here and go into present mode. And now we start to see the power of it, because the first thing that opens, hopefully, eventually, there we go, is a title slide. So this is great. This gives us a way to like introduce the topic, a little bit of information, nice background image to tell people what it is that this story is going to be about. And then by clicking these little chevrons, as they're called, these little arrowheads, we can start moving through. Now, when we move to the second point, suddenly this looks very familiar. This looks just like that stuff we were looking at in Voyager, right? There's a panel on the side here, there's images, there's text, there could be links. I haven't added any in here particularly. And this is associated with this point down here.
John, sorry, can I interrupt? Would you be able to just share that link again, the bit.ly link again?
No, well, that's just to go to the document. That won't get them to the Google Earth example. Other that. So we can just put that up there. It's just bit.ly/Kokoda TC. The capitalization does matter in a bit.ly link. That might be something people are struggling with. Yeah, there you go. You got it. Okay, perfect. All right. So let's bounce to our second point here, and you see that we move across the landscape. Now, just to show you that this is like Voyager, that we can go back here and we can click on that and it will open that particular, these are called info cards, these sort of sidebars with information in. All right, and then there are some other things in here, but rather than me just sort of clicking through and talking about them, much better I go into creation mode and let's start building this from scratch and showing you how you would do that. So what we're going to provide here is something of a rapid walkthrough of the different possibilities. But if you go to chapter 4 in the workbook, it does step you through everything we're going to show here and more at a much slower pace and in full detail. So if you do properly work that chapter, you will be able to create these projects, I promise you. All right, so let's go back to projects. And if you missed how to open it, let's go all the way back here. You start by clicking on this icon here, the third one up from the bottom, or what's that, the fifth one down. Looks like a little marker on a square. Opens up this panel here. Now, because you've never used this before, you probably won't see anything. And I'm just actually going to hide this one here. See how I rolled over and I clicked on the creepy eyeball there? Well, that can make it vanish. But we need to get started. So to get started, you might not even have this panel here. I think it's actually going to show an icon and some options to start a new project. So we want to do that. We want to create a project in Google Drive. Now, here's the first important take-home thing. This content we're creating, when we create it in Google Drive, it's like a Google Doc, as in it lives in Google Drive. You can share it with other people through Google Drive or through Google Earth. You can have multiple people editing it. The one way it's a little different from, say, a Google Doc is you can't be editing at the same time. It gets a little confused when you do that. But you can have different, say, students accessing the same project, and they can take turns to like add and edit features in there. All right, so let's create a new project. So when we do that, this pops up. So by default, it's going to say untitled project. We can change that by clicking on the little pencil icon there, and we're just going to call this, I'm bad at this, my new project. You don't have to call it that. You can call it whatever you want. And in here, you would add a description. Again, I'm very bad at this in live demo, so let's just put blah, blah, blah for now. But where the magic happens is with this blue button. So if we click on this blue button, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of options to get going here. And let's look at the first two to begin with, because they sort of do the same function for us in slightly different ways. Now, the feature you're most likely and most frequently going to create is the marker, the place mark. I think this is something we're all sort of familiar with now that we use Google Earth, Google Maps, and similar applications. We're used to this idea of some sort of marker indicating a location on a map. So one way to do this is simply to click the add place mark right there and then click somewhere on the map. But I'm not going to go that route right now. I'm going to, instead, I'm going to search for a place. So let's search for a place. And since it's our topic, let's start by searching for Kokoda. Now, I'm kind of starting in the middle of my story here in some ways, so this is sort of a bad example. But I just wanted to fly you here and show you that, as we know from search, we get a little info card pops up. But also, you may have noticed this last time, at the bottom of these info cards, there's this option to add to project. And so this is a really quick and easy way to get this going, get this marker in our project. Now, what's interesting about if we do it this way is not only does it give us the marker, is it brings some of that card information in too. But you know what? I don't want that information. So I'm going to hit this button here, replace. And when I do that, it's going to open up some options that I would have seen if I just placed the marker there for myself. And hopefully these options are fairly self-explanatory. For example, there's a little widget here where you can click and it opens a window that pops up that gives us different ways to add images or videos. So for example, I could go to do a Google image search. So I know this really isn't on theme, but this is my go-to search term is bunnies. where I quite often search for fluffy bunnies. And I'm going to select one of my fluffy bunnies. And I'm going to add it in there. And I can add more images. I can actually, I think it used to be 25. It may have gone up. But I can add a whole bunch of images associated with this one location. So we're not making new locations here. We're just making single, multiple images associated with one location. Now, one useful thing here is I could upload an album to my photos, and I could select, this is always dangerous when you go into your own photos, right here. I could select something there. So to go with my fluffy bunny, I'm adding a big yellow inflatable duck because these things just go together. So, and then down here, I can start to add my text. And I can also format that text. There's a lot of rich formats and text options, the way to add the hyperlinks, a lot of things you can do there. But I just want to fill some stuff in here. I know it's gibberish, but I want to fill it in because I want you to see what this looks like. We've added photos, we've given it a title, or it came with a title because we searched for Kokoda. We could change this if we wanted. We added stuff down here. And then there's in fact 3 types that we can go with. So if we select large info box and then we go up to preview, this is going to look like what we've already seen, that full top to bottom side panel that slides out. Okay. Oh, I should have just, yep, there we go, back into edit mode. Now, there is a smaller version of that called the small info box. Now, if we preview that, that actually also looks very familiar. That looks like the info cards that we get when we search for something. Or there is, in fact, a third option where you might say, well, you know what, I just don't want info associated with this one. And there can be valid reasons and times when you want this, in which case, let's just choose no info box and we don't really need to worry about any of this. But carrying on down, let's look at some of the more of the features and things we can select here. For example, we can change the icon, and there are a whole bunch of other icons that we can select. In fact, we can even go as far as uploading our own custom icon, which is just an image file. So we could upload a little, again, this is bad when you don't set this up and people get to see what's on your computer. But let's just go here. I must have a useful picture in here. All right. Random picture of Australia. That may be too large. Oh no, there it goes. It worked. And in fact, I can up the size of this as I can for any icon. There are also some advanced options there to do with the labeling. We can change the label size. There's even ways to manually adjust the location of the marker there, but we don't really need to get into that right now. We are going to get into these boxes down here, but not just yet. But what I do want to do right now is just pause for a second. Yeah, not just bunnies, Brett. Fluffy bunnies is usually the go-to search term. I'm just saying, you know, what can I say? I've had a long day. I want to pause and just see if there are any questions. If anyone's kind of struggling to follow here, doesn't understand what's going on, let's just take a moment. Please speak up. We've got a bunch more things to show, but we're doing well on time. So let me know. Or as we say, put things in the chat. Okay. All right. Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, it does make a lot more sense when we kind of get to the end and we have multiple markers. All right, so let's just go back and let's sort of plow ahead. Let's back up And you'll see now that we've got this may help you, Nicholas, where things start to make sense. We've got a marker here. Now, if I was to add more markers, let's just create one there, and I'm not even going to bother editing it. I'm just going to back out. Okay, there's a second marker. Third marker. All right. Now maybe it starts to make sense, because if we go into the present mode for this, suddenly we've got 3 locations, and well, nothing's going to happen because actually we sort of turned off that functionality. So let me quickly go here and edit this. Here we go. So that we get, oh, should have had an info box. That's interesting. Okay, let's do that one. And in fact, let's give number 3 an info box just so we can see some changes. All right, we're saying small. Okay. All right, let's go into present mode. All right, there we are. So stop 1, that opened up. Stop 2, there's no info box, nothing open. Stop 3, small box. Now you'll notice we didn't move around the globe at all. And that's because when we created these markers, we were just at the same viewpoint. Like, we hadn't moved. So as far as Google Earth is concerned, as far as the projects are concerned, that's the default view for that location. Like, we didn't change anything. So let's do something about that. Let's definitely move our view here. And let's go into edit that marker, and don't fly away. Let's go here, and now you'll notice, see this blue button down here, capture the view. I'm going to click that in 1 second, but before I do, I want to expose these numbers here. Now look at the numbers right there, and look what happens when I click the blue button. Did you see they changed? If you didn't catch it, let me get even more artistic here. Let me move to a tilted view. Now watch what happens when I click the blue button. There, see, we've now added heading and tilt. So this feature is called the default view. And this is one of the great strengths of creating these things in Google Earth, because we've got this wonderful 3D environment. So let's make use of it. Let's add these 3D views as our default fly to location. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go back out, and let's present this again. So, okay, now it's going to fly out to that default view for the first marker. Sidebar pops open. Second marker, we didn't move anywhere. There's no sidebar, so nothing happens. Third marker, not only do we get our small window opening, we get that cool acute viewpoint. So hopefully we're starting to see the strengths of this. All right. Well, we've just been talking about place marks, but let's go back in and maybe look at what else is available. Well, we can also put lines and polygons on here. What's the use of that? Well, let's say our story involved a river and we wanted to highlight the river, or I don't know, a footpath, maybe one called the Kokoda Track. We can do that by just selecting line and then starting clicking points, creating vertices. And you'll notice that a line is automatically drawn between those points, those vertices. Now, if I hit return on my keyboard, it's going to capture that. That's kind of locked in now. So unfortunately, I can't add any more points. However, I can go in here and I can edit the location of these vertices. So I kind of missed the river here. So I can grab these, and every time I grab one of the small ones in the middle, 2 more ones are interpolated in between. So this is really useful because this allows us to sort of create a rough line, and then we can go back later and we can edit it to be a lot more accurate. We can also change the width of this line, change the color. We can select a custom color. I'm sure you're familiar with doing this on color palettes on any sort of, and many applications you've used on your computers. We can also add our info boxes. Now, I've been typing gibberish in these info boxes, but hopefully you see the connection back to the document, because let's say that I wanted this line associated with this particular information. What I can do is just copy that text, go over here and paste it in right there. And now when I preview that feature, there's my text. So, by doing preparation like this, you do not have to resort to typing gibberish and searching for bunny rabbits. No. All right, so that's a line. I said that you can have shapes or polygons as well. How do we do that? Well, kind of in a similar way. It's the same start mechanism, only the one thing that we do with this is we go back and we close the shape. And when we do that, you'll notice that it becomes a little translucent there. And now, not only have we got the line color and width, we've got the fill color and percentage. We could make this totally opaque, or we can make it somewhat transparent. So this is a really great feature if we want to like highlight an area. We could give it, a high level of transparency, but some sort of color that matches, goes up against the landscape and says, oh, look, okay, I'm going to highlight this forest right here. And again, we can associate info boxes. We can set default viewpoints. So when you go to this feature, if I want you to view it like that, I just set up while in edit mode for that feature and I capture that view. All right, okay, gonna keep going here. I apologize to some of you. I know this is probably a little bit fast and overwhelming. I'm just trying to show you what's possible. I'll reiterate again, if you go back to chapter 4 in the student workbook, it takes you through this in a much better, slower process, using that Kokoda information to build a real example. All right. Couple more things I want to show you here before we get to our final part of this session. You notice when I demoed the start of the Kokoda story that we started with a slide, a full screen slide. That's this thing here. So to create a full screen slide, actually, it looks very familiar. The boxes are kind of, we've seen these before, the way to click and select a photo, the way to add text. Now, in this case, it's going to put them together a little bit differently. The photo we select is going to be our background image. This is especially for Brett. All right, where's one of my fluffiest friends? There we go. This is what we need. All right. And then we can add our text. All right, so now when we preview that, this is what we're seeing. So that text, I didn't name it properly, and we use that image as our background feature of filling the screen. So if we're thinking about our story, this is kind of a great way to sort of put breaks in as sort of, if you like, chapter headings or an overview at the start and a conclusion at the end, maybe some information in between. Particularly if we've got information that we're struggling to associate to a geographic point. Because obviously that's just filling the screen, so it doesn't really matter where in the world we are at that point. Okay, what else we got here? Don't worry about this one at the bottom. This is advanced stuff that requires an external program that is advanced. Unless you're a programmer And if you want to know more about this, you know, you can ask me if you are a programmer. Honestly, I'll just point you to the online documentation and you'll probably be able to take it from there. But the one thing I do want to show that's left on the list here is add a folder. And I'm gonna add one here, and I'm going to explain why it's useful and important. So right now, the folder's here. There's nothing in the folder. So when we present this, and I should have pointed this out earlier. I started to and I stopped. If you want to see all the features in the story and maybe even jump ahead a couple of stops, you can open this table of contents here. And there we see those three markers we created: the path, the polygon, the slide. And I can jump straight to these locations. Now, the slide was our 6th stop. If I go to our 7th, it looks like nothing's going on. That's because that's just an empty folder right now. So you might say, well, what use is that? Well, here's the use of the folder, right? Imagine we want to create things like these lines and paths, lines or polygons, or even place marks, but we don't want them to be stops along the way. We just want them to be highlighting stuff, in, if you like, be part of the background. What I can do is I could drag these into a folder I've created. Now, when I go to present mode, instead of having 7 stops, we only got 5. And we'll be able to click through them. But let's go to the slide, and then let's go here. Now you'll notice we just went back to sort of like nothing happened view. But the important thing is, even though they're not listed here, the path and the polygon exist. We've made them part of our landscape. And there's even ways to play with this on the fly. What do I mean by this? Well, you heard me earlier talk about the creepy eyeball as a way of making things visible, invisible. Creepy eyeball, I don't think is the official term, but that is the term I've used in describing this for like 10 years, so I refuse to change it. So by clicking on creepy eyeball, let's choose the polygon, we can make it vanish. Now, we haven't deleted it. It's still there. See, I can bring it back. But it might be that in a particular present mode, we don't want it there. Maybe we want to present this to tell a story or to get students examining an area and coming to some conclusions. And then we can go back as the teacher, we can go back, we can make this visible and, if you like, show them the answer. So there are creative ways to use this on the fly. It's also great for organizing stuff into these groups when you don't want to click through every stop. All right, so we're coming to the last 15 minutes here. Before we stop and we talk about some important things related to you guys making these projects, there's one other thing that I need to point out. So yeah, let me use my good, nice, created tool for this. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go into edit mode, and now this will make sense hopefully for you. If we look down my sort of edit panel here, we recognize, okay, oh, I've got a slide there and a marker, and then, oh look, he used a folder, and he put a whole bunch of markers in there. And this allows him to like make them just appear as stops along the way, or sorry, as places along the way, but not stops in the story. All right. Now, up here, first of all, don't click that button unless you really mean it. That will delete your project. So that's not good. But this button is good, because this button allows us to share what we've created with others. They can just be viewers, they can edit it. This looks, for all of you who've ever used Google Docs, Google Drive, this looks very, very familiar because it's the same. It's that same sharing mechanism. As I said, these things are stored on Google Drive. As long as we started out by creating on Google Drive, that's where they'll be. There is a way to create these locally or just on your computer, but we don't want to do that because there's no way to then add them to Google Drive. That just gets messy. So stay away from that. And what I mean by that is when you're doing a new project, don't click these ones that say KML. Stick to the ones that say create a project, and then say you've created it, and I'm just going to clear. So I'm not deleting anything, I'm clearing. So look, it's gone, but now I'm going to go to open project from Google Drive. And there it is, listed in my owned projects. And I can make it reappear. Now, the other thing I did is when it first appears, it appears my recents here. If I hit the little push pin here, it's going to kick it up to pin to Earth. So when I close out of Google Earth and maybe go back in, it's going to hang around in there. So this is really useful because when we open these, they all open in recent, and I might get a whole stack of them. And I want to go to these 3 dots and clear those out from time to time. But if I want to keep them sort of on my shelf, I can put them here. And again, if I don't want them messing with my display because I'm maybe working on something else, let's just make them invisible for the time being. All right, once again, all of this is explained in the workbook and in the Google Earth manual runs through what all these different buttons and features do. Okay. All right, good. So, yep, question from Nicholas. When do we have it completed by? Good question. This is what we're going to discuss in the last 15 minutes here. I'm going to hopefully go through those logistic aspects quickly and then leave some time for questioning. So the idea of what we're asking you all to do here as participants is we really want you to make one of these projects. And we ideally, we would love to have a multifaceted story, but you know what, if that seems too much or is too complicated, I would still just like to see a visualization, whether it's points on the map showing me great places around your campus or your town or your neighborhood, or maybe taking me on a tour of your neighborhood. Create something like that. That will all be great. But we want you to create something like that. In Google Classroom, we're going to make this an assignment. So in Google Classroom, you'll need to share 2 things with us. And the first thing, you do it from in here. You share, you make it shareable to us. So the easiest way to do that, once again, let's just go through this, is in edit mode, go up to the little person plus button, and down here, we want to make this viewable for anyone on the link. Don't make it editable for anyone, just viewer is fine. Anyone with the link, copy that link, and then that's the link you're going to paste in response to the assignment on Google Classroom. All right, that is the first thing. The second thing is, to go along with that, we'd like you to make a little kind of what you might call a cover page for the project. What do I mean by that? Well, that could be a document where you just list the school you're from and who worked on this, and a 1 or 2 paragraph description of what your story or tour is about. Now, that's one way of doing it, is just making a document like that. If you want to get a little more creative, feel free, instead of making a cover page, of recording a video of you describing your project. And if you're really good, maybe you could even screen capture of you taking us on the present mode of your project. That would be really impressive if anyone is able to do that. But that's what we want to see, is the link to the project, the cover page document or a video, because what we want to do with that is we want to put those on the PAS website, the PAS website where you see all the information about here. We want to showcase your work on there so everyone can easily find it and see the great things that you've done. And then our fourth session that we're going to be running, the fourth seminar, and I know this is number 2 and I'm talking about number 4, I'll come back to number 3 in a second, is we're actually going to have a showcasing session. Now we're still working on the details of that. So that, if you will, Nicholas, is your deadline, because or maybe a couple of days before that, because we want to be able to get some of you to maybe show off, or at least we'll be able to show off the things that you created as part of that session. And we're going to have a lot of time to like discuss, you know, what was good about this process, what was bad, what we think we could do with it as a learning tool in the future. So that's session 4, and that I'm going to get my date wrong here. I think that's the 30th. Is that right, Nicole? 30th of March. Okay. Because I'm a day behind you guys. If you know, I'm still behind the other side of the date line. So session 3 is going to occur a week before that. Now, session 3 is completely optional. Session 3 is going to be me sitting on a Google Meet, on this Google Meet link for an hour, and you are welcome to join me and ask me questions and get help and chat about your ideas and the things that you're working on. I guarantee I will be online for that hour. I may end up sitting here by myself because it's completely optional. But if you want to join and get some guidance and some help, or maybe chat with some others that might be joining, then that's the time for that. So it's a tech center help time. That's session 3, and that will be 2 weeks from now. Of course, in the interim, feel free to respond to the posts on Classroom. If you're really in depth and you don't want to put it out there, please contact the PAS staff and they can forward emails or just, you know, give you my direct link if that's going to be the best way to do it. We really want you to be successful and to create some good things with this, because 1, we want to see that, and 2, we really hope that like this is useful for you, that you're gaining some skill sets, gaining some knowledge of not just the Google Earth application, but gaining the idea of how you think geographically and how you think about storytelling. So with that, I think that's everything I have to say. We still have about 7 minutes left, so we've got time for questions, thoughts. Again, feel free, add in the chat or raise your hand. We can take this time. If it's been a long day already, don't feel bad about hanging up. You know, I don't know. I guess Nicole, Sophie, is anything you need to say to them, just in case some people do need to go? No. So
no, just thank you, John, for another interesting session, and I think you've highlighted the key dates and next steps really well. We've tried to support your advice by noting that key information in the chat box. And I guess just last chance for any questions. No question is silly, so please feel free to ask a question before you embark on your projects.
And you know what? I just had a thought. There was one thing I wanted to show you all, and I forgot. So sorry, those that have left already. I'm going to show you this real quick. It goes back to when we were adding the viewpoints to, say, a marker. So let me do it this way. I'm going to search for place. Let's search for one of our PNG schools right here. Okay, so this comes up right here, takes us to the campus. I'm going to add that to my project. Okay, I'm going to leave the information in here, but the one thing I am going to change is I want to change the view, but I'm not going to capture this view. I'm actually going to go down and click our little friend Pegman that we learned about last time. And I'm going to go into one of these blue dots that now appear on all of our PNG campuses. And when we click, come on, you know you want to, there we go. No, doesn't want to behave, come on. There we go. These dots represent 360 Street View imagery. So I don't know how many of you were involved with this part of the project or past activities 2 years ago in PNG, but you may remember having those 360 cameras and going around campus collecting that imagery. Well, we've now made all of that imagery available in Street View, which means you can add it to your projects. So when we preview this, and actually we need to exit to prove that this is the case. So let's go and let's just present this project, and it's go, and it's going to fly in, and it's going to go automatically in to that Street View image. So you can do this for anywhere. You can just see if the Street View imagery doesn't have to just be our imagery. It can be anyone's Street View imagery you can make as the default view. So apologies, meant to include that. Wanted to mention the PNG 360 imagery. So that's something you can maybe think about using if you're one of those schools. All right, so I guess thank you all. I'll hang around for the next few if there are questions, but otherwise appreciate you joining us, and hopefully if we don't see you in 2 weeks, we'll see you for the showcase in 3 weeks.